I arrived 2 weeks early, interrupting Christmas dinner, or so my mom tells me. But that's perfect for a kid destined to be a toy and game designer. I was one of 6 kids raised in the South, but we never said y'all. We said yous, as in how you's doing, because the South I was raised in was South Jersey. We were a blue-collar family, not a lot of money, so the toys that we had were often cheap. But the play was deep. For instance, I learned that when I threw a frisbee and it rose on a summer breeze, it could elevate my mood right with it. If I was covered with sticky, itchy, muddy grass, I could ignore it if I was in line for another trip on the slip and slide. And I discovered Super Ball's lethal second bounce the hard way with welts to prove it. But it taught me something about myself, that like my favorite boyhood ball, I could take my lumps and bounce back. By the time I was a teen, I discovered intense competition in the form of backyard wiffle ball games. I remember a mulberry tree was the foul pole in right, the clothesline pole in left, but I don't remember a lot of arguments over fair and foul. I do remember arguments over balls and strikes, and that's because our strike zone was a masking tape box stuck to plywood, and if a pitch was thrown that wasn't swung at, where it hit on that plywood was often argued about, until we discovered the folding aluminum lawn chair in the garage. And more importantly, the fact that a wiffle ball hitting that chair makes a very different sound than a wiffle ball hitting a piece of plywood. The chair became our strike zone. Now, if a pitch wasn't swung at and we heard a thud, it was a ball because it hit the plywood. Aluminum tink meant it was a strike because it hit the chair. This was the first thing I invented, a strike zone that worked by sound. And we invented a lot of toys as kids, but it wasn't until 10 years later that I turned it into a career. When 2 buddies came down to Sarasota to visit me to work on a game we had invented called Tri-Bond. Tri-Bond was written in Selby Library and New College Library. A few years later, I went to Gauchio's school in Sarasota to visit my girlfriend in her 3rd grade classroom and came up with Blurt. Tri-Bond and Blurt have sold 4 million copies, and that teacher has been my wife for 25 years. If you create a piece of music that sells 1 million copies, you are awarded a platinum record and probably the cover of Rolling Stone. But if you're Eleanor Abbott and you invented Candyland, a game that hasn't sold 1 million copies, but 150 million copies, no one's heard of you. And it's stories like hers that made me want to co-produce a documentary film called Toyland by director Ken Sons, which debuted at the Sarasota Film Festival in 2010. A few years ago, I was asked to give the keynote speech at the Florida Public Relations Association annual conference. And I told the story of my friend John Spinello, who invented the classic game Operation. John sold the patents to that game in 1963 and later fell on hard times. What did the Central West Coast chapter of the FPRA do? Fly John to Sarasota for a fundraiser and a night that none of us will ever forget. 2020 has been hard. I think now more than ever, we need the fun and connection that play provides. 2020 is also my 30th anniversary from starting in the toy business, and I still love to create. Like this game, Megamouth. This is a lip-reading game that is premiering at Target stores nationally this fall. And you read lips with a magnifying lens, and it's actually hilarious. So play can entertain us, it can connect us, but can it help us excel? In the 1990s, I led teams that took a game company from annual sales of 2.5 million to over 20 million. And when I struck out on my own a few years later, I really missed those teams that I managed and found out the hard way that it was difficult to manage myself until I learned to gamify my goals to recapture the joy of my job. So my next secret project is a book that I'm working on that I hope will teach us that if we want to win the day, we have to seize the play. I learned this in part from psychologist Jordan Peterson, who learned it from neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp, that if we want to live a meaningful life, we have to get good at iterated games across time, because there isn't just you, there are multiple yous now and in the future. So the question really becomes, how are yous doing?